what if the very lines on a map, the ones that decide your voting district, could actually change how much your voice matters?
Yeah, like amplifying some voices while maybe quieting others.
Exactly. And right now in Texas, there's this really intense debate bubbling up around something called House Bill 4.
HB4, right. It's a plan to redraw the congressional districts.
But here's the thing that makes it so, well, controversial.
Mm-hmm.
It's not happening after the big 10-year census count like usual.
No, they're proposing to do it right now, mid-decade. That's pretty unusual.
Supporters, though, they argue it's absolutely necessary. They say representation needs to match who actually lives in Texas today.
Especially with, populations shifting so much since the last maps were drawn back after 2020.
They're pointing to some recent court rulings, too, and even arguing the last census wasn't quite accurate, maybe undercounted people.
So from their perspective, these new lines are needed for things to be truly fair.
But then you have the opponents, and they're calling it something very different.
Oh, yeah. They see it as a straight-up power grab.
Designed, they say, specifically to weaken the votes of minority communities and maybe folks with different political viewpoints.
They're raising flags about it being unconstitutional, a lack of transparency.
And they're asking why lawmakers aren't focused on urgent stuff, like flood relief, instead of political map drawing.
It really puts a spotlight on this bigger national picture, doesn't it? The struggle over how political power is gained, how it's kept.
And that fundamental question, do citizens pick their leaders? Or are leaders finding ways to pick their voters? It makes you wonder, could the strokes of a pen on a map truly redefine who represents you in the halls of power? Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're jumping into a whole stack of public comments on Texas House Bill 4. That's the bill aiming to redraw congressional districts.
Yeah, quite a stack.
Our mission here is pretty clear. We want to pull out the main arguments, for and against this mid-decade redistricting.
And really try to understand the different ideas of what fair representation even means in this context.
Right. We want to give you a shortcut, basically, to getting informed on something that's really shaping the political landscape down there and, frankly, has implications everywhere.
Absolutely, because this isn't just about lines on a piece of paper, is it? It's about how democracy is supposed to work.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll look at the why behind doing this now, dig into the concerns lots of Texans have voiced.
And connect it back to those bigger ideas about how we're all meant to be represented.
It's definitely a fascinating look at how population changes, political strategy, and what citizens think all kind of crash together.
Okay, so let's just quickly lay the groundwork. Normally, congressional district maps get redrawn every 10 years, right?
Yeah.
After the big U.S. Census.
That's the standard process, yeah.
And the main reason for that is to make sure each district has roughly the same number of people.
It all comes back to that core principle, one person, one vote.
Meaning your vote should carry about the same weight whether you live in a crowded city district or a sprawling rural one.
Exactly. It's meant to reflect how populations grow or shrink or move around over a decade. Keep things balanced.
The census provides that sort of objective count to base it on.
Right. It's meant to be the nonpartisan data set that ensures districts are, equitable in size. That's how we've traditionally tried to maintain fairness.
Okay, so that's the norm. Which brings us to Texas right now, which is, well, not the norm.
Definitely a departure.
They're looking at House Bill 4, HB 4 in 2025 to redraw these congressional districts. But the key thing is, it's mid-decade. No new census triggering it.
And that's the big question everyone's asking, why now?
Right. Why step outside that regular 10-year cycle?
Usually, mid-decade redistricting happens only if, say, a court throws out the existing maps as unconstitutional.
Or maybe if a state suddenly gained or lost a bunch of seats, which isn't the case here either.
So doing it without those kinds of triggers is definitely raising eyebrows and a lot of concern.
But even with the unusual timing, there's a significant group of Texans who are strongly for HB 4. They see it as essential.
Yeah, advocates like Frank McLean, for instance, they argue the current map just doesn't accurately represent Texans anymore.
They believe HB 4 will fix that.
Right. They think it'll lead to maps that better match the state's actual demographics today, and maybe its political leanings, too. The idea is the current ones are sort of out of sync.
We saw that echoed quite a bit, like Scott Hillegas from Austin. He said HB 4 is great for Texas and more aligns with the demographics of the state.
Mm-hmm. And someone from Plano stressed that fair and updated congressional district maps are essential to ensure every Texan's voice is represented accurately and equally.
So there's this underlying belief that the 2021 maps are just wrong somehow.
And a big part of that argument, coming from people like Shirley Anderson in Houston, centers on the 2020 census itself.
They think it was flawed.
Yeah, they argue it significantly undercounted Texas. So for them, HB4 isn't some political game. It's about correcting the error of 2021 to get fair congressional seat representation.
Basically fixing a mistake based on bad data, in their view.
That's the argument.
And it's not just the census data. Supporters are also pointing to recent court decisions.
Ah, yes, the Petaway v. Galveston County case from the Fifth Circuit in 2024.
Right. What was the takeaway there that supporters are using?
Well, the interpretation some are taking is that the Voting Rights Act protects, say, a single concentrated minority group when drawing lines, but maybe not a broader coalition of different minority groups spread out.
So they see that ruling as giving them a legal green light, essentially, to redraw lines, even if it breaks up some of those multi-ethnic voting blocks.
From their perspective, it clarifies what's legally required, or perhaps what's not required, potentially justifying these changes.
And if we look at the bigger political picture here, the maps proposed under HB4, they seem aimed at increasing Republican seats pretty significantly.
Yeah, the numbers mentioned are going from 25 Republican seats potentially up to 33 out of 38 total.
And supporters aren't shying away from that. We saw comments like one from Mary Stone, a retired doctor in Dallas.
What did she say?
She argued, Texas is Republican plus 10, and we need a state house that represents that. She linked it to Republican values like limited government, personal responsibility, pro-life.
So there's a clear partisan goal there, framed as making the legislature truly reflect what they see as the state's majority viewpoint.
Okay, so that's the case for HB4. But wow, the public comments also showed a huge amount of opposition, often quite forceful.
Oh, absolutely. A lot of pushback. People like Madeline Rico from El Paso, she called the bill voter suppression and petty party politics.
And used the word gerrymandering. Can you just quickly remind us what that means?
Sure. Gerrymandering is basically drawing district lines in a way that deliberately helps one party or group and hurts another. You might pack opponents into one district so they win overwhelmingly there but lose elsewhere, or crack them up across many districts so they can't form a majority anywhere.
Got it. And Lois Arguello from Austin had a similar take, Racy, saying it steals voters' right to choose their representatives, a power grab.
Yeah, those phrases came up a lot. There's this real sense of fundamental unfairness about the process itself.
And some critics went even further, linking it directly to race. Jennifer Graham from Farmers Branch, Diana Aguirre from Austin.
What were they saying?
Calling the map a grotesque and racist power grab, arguing it violates the Voting Rights Act by specifically weakening the power of communities of color.
Targeting areas like South Texas, Austin, Houston, DFW.
Exactly. Maria Lugo from Houston put it very bluntly. She said Texas is majority-minority now, about 40% white, but white representatives hold about 80% of seats. Her question, how can this be? Her answer, gerrymandering.
That brings up the issue of transparency, too, which many opponents hammered on.
Right. Diana Aguirre said the whole process lacked transparency and accountability.
Maps dropped suddenly, minimal notice, no real chance for community input.
That was the claim. And several people mentioned public hearings being swamped with opposition, sometimes with, only one person speaking in favor.
That perception of secrecy definitely adds fuel to the fire.
Another big theme was how this ignores communities of interest. What are those exactly?
Think of groups with shared concerns, maybe social, economic, cultural, like a neighborhood, or people working in the same industry or relying on the same local services.
And the argument is HB4 carves these communities up.
That's the fear. Maria Lugo from Watauga mentioned areas like Austin, San Antonio, or urban areas mixed with rural ones. They have different needs, right? Hard to represent if you split them.
Adrian Fuentes from El Paso specifically talked about his community getting shifted away from his local focus.
And we saw really specific examples from El Paso commenters, didn't we? Mentioning how things like the VA hospital, Fort Bliss, the airport, crucial local institutions would end up in districts based hundreds of miles away.
Making local representation on those issues pretty much impossible.
Yeah, a major concern. And then there's the timing issue again.
So many people brought this up, calling it a waste of time and tax dollars when Texas has other big problems.
Like J.C. Lewis Watkins from Houston, who found it incredible that during a special session, the focus was redrawing maps to, in her words, suppress voters instead of tackling the power grid, flood relief, or other crises.
That feeling that politicians are focused on political favor instead of actual work was really widespread.
And some explicitly linked it to national political pressure, suggesting this push was coming from outside Texas to gain seats for the party.
And maybe the most common feeling, the one that came up over and over from opponents.
Let me guess. Politicians are choosing their voters instead of voters choosing their leaders.
Exactly. We saw that from Marissa Paz, Marshall George, Stephanie Vanacek, so many others. It's a really powerful statement about what they feel is happening to democracy.
And it wasn't just Democrats, right? You mentioned a Republican.
Right. Yeah, Jacqueline Sur saying, as a Republican, you all are pushing me to be a Democrat. If you do this, I'm done. That shows pretty deep unease, even within the party. So where does this leave us? I mean, looking through all these comments on HB4, it really throws this fundamental disagreement into sharp relief, doesn't it, about what fair representation actually is.
It really does. You've got one side saying, look, we need to adjust these maps now to reflect today's political reality, maybe fix old census errors, follow new court guidance.
Their goal is what they see as a more accurate reflection of the whole state's voting population. A necessary correction, basically.
Right. But then the other side sees it completely differently. They argue these mid-decade changes are just raw partisanship.
Designed specifically to water down the votes of growing communities, especially minority communities.
Who, let's not forget, accounted for almost all of Texas's population growth in the last decade. So they see it not as a correction, but as actively taking away power. Disenfranchisement.
It just makes it so clear that fair representation isn't some simple concept everyone agrees on.
Not at all. It's messy. It gets shaped by court cases, by who's moving where, by political ambitions, and by these really deep beliefs people have about how democracy should function.
Yeah, these comments weren't just technical arguments about map lines. They were emotional. About power, about who gets heard, about fairness in a state that's changing so fast.
And you really sense the frustration from citizens who feel like the system is being rigged against them, that their voice is being intentionally muffled. That's a dangerous place for any democracy to be.
So our deep dive into this Texas redistricting fight really shows a state, and maybe the country, wrestling with some huge questions about power, about demographics, about what democracy even means on the ground.
And both sides are using the word fairness, but meaning vastly different things by it.
While some genuinely believe HB4 will fix imbalances and make representation match the current political reality.
Many, many others see it as undermining diverse communities, putting party politics ahead of transparent processes that involve the actual communities being affected.
This whole fight over who draws the lines, and when they get to draw them, it's clearly going to keep shaping who gets heard in government.
No doubt about it.
So, as Texas keeps growing and changing so dramatically, how can citizens make sure their voices count, especially when the maps themselves are part of the political battle?
Yeah. What kind of system really guarantees representation for everyone? And how much power should politicians have in designing the very districts they hope to win?
Definitely something to think about until our next deep dive.